We are super excited to bring you this bonus episode showcasing 7 speakers in 7 days.
This episode is a partnership between the Data in Education and Building a Culture of Collaboration podcasts, with episodes being released through each podcast.
The bonus series showcases speakers who will be presenting at the June 2025 Data and Education Virtual Summit happening June 10th and 11th. We encourage you to search Data and Education Summit June 2025 to learn more and register. You can also check out the show notes for additional links.
So, Jess, we're excited to dive into this episode, so let's get started.
Intentional and purposeful focus on building a culture of collaboration is the secret for leaders striving to make a difference. In building a culture of collaboration, Kurtis and Lorna Hewson will share simple tips, ideas, and strategies to take your organization's collaborative efforts to the next level.
Welcome. I'm Jessica Lane, host of the Data and Education podcast.
And we are Kurtis and Lorna Hewson, hosts of the Building a Culture of Collaboration podcast.
In today's bonus episode, we're thrilled to welcome Casey Watts, CEO of Casey Watts Coaching and Consulting, who brings 2 decades of diverse education experience to her work. Casey is all about helping leaders find clarity, and she knows that clarity is a total game changer when it comes to building a thriving data culture in schools. Get ready to clear things up.
So, Casey, welcome. We're so excited to be able to chat with you.
Yeah, I am pumped to be here. Really excited about this conversation. We are all smiles this morning, so I know it's going to be a fantastic podcast episode.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So why don't you start off by just giving us a little bit of your background? We gave the condensed version, but expand that out. What do people need to know about Casey Watts?
Yeah, so probably the most important thing that you all maybe would like to know about me is that I'm one of those people that said I would never, ever get into education, never wanted to be a teacher. I told my mom, no, I don't like kids. Like, no, that is not for me. Lo and behold, after, trying to muddle my way through a couple of different majors in college, I found myself in education, and I've been there ever since, and I love it so much. I loved being a classroom teacher. I did that for about 13 to 15 years, along with some other roles. So I've kind of done a mix of different roles, and what I love about that is that I've been able to see so many different perspectives. And because of those different perspectives, I now find myself in a role where I am trying to bridge the gap between all of those different perspectives. And so that's what I do on a daily basis. Not only I'm currently a district instructional specialist, and I get to do that work on the daily where I'm bridging the gap between the adults on campuses and between departments so that we can bridge the gap in student learning, but I do that in my consulting as well. And that's what I aim to focus on my podcast. And when I'm speaking is how do we break down silos and instead build, like you said, a culture of collaboration? And I truly believe that it boils down to clarity. So if you didn't get information that you're like, man, I really want to know these other things about her, then reach out to me. I can tell you all kinds of things that you really didn't think you needed to know in the first place.
I have a really super important follow-up question.
Yeah.
What was your very first major when you went into school?
Music. So my goal,
Interesting.
my goal was to, I was focused on jazz performance. And so I did vocal performance and piano. And so I was like determined that was going to be what I went into. But, I went to this school that was really hardcore music program. And it took all the joy out of it for me. So I was like, okay, this is more of a hobby. These people are on another level. And then I moved to psychology because who doesn't try to major in psychology? Because when you don't know what to do, you're like, oh, psychology. And then you get into that and you're like, wow, you're finding out all the things that are wrong with you. And you're like, I think I'm schizophrenic. I think, you hear all of these things and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, all of this applies to me. So I transitioned out of that pretty quickly.
We started in forensic science. Kurtis and Lorna, did you guys do anything before education?
No, I thought for a while I was going to be an architect, and then I realized it involved math and not just drawing really cool buildings. So decided that wasn't going to work for me. But yeah, teaching was fairly early.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I did a music diploma before I went to university, but the same thing. But by the time you're done, it's okay. Well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with this? So,
Okay. Well, now that we know that, we have to switch this podcast and just do like some kind of musical performance.
Yeah. Acapella. How about for you, Jen? What was yours before, Jess?
Mine was forensic science.
Okay.
Oh,
Yep.
interesting.
Forensic science, which makes sense because I have a strange obsession with all things true crime. So
Okay, but that
I'm not a scary person, though. I promise. I'm
yeah,
not.
it connects though a little bit with the data piece as well. And
Yes.
okay, we probably have to clear this up as this is one of 7 bonus episodes that we're doing. Are we going to say data, or go back and forth
boy.
between all?
Oh,
You know, it's a
boy.
really important question.
I say data, but I have no preference, no judgment. My boss always said data, and she was like, "Everyone else says data," and I'm like, "I feel like everyone else says data." Like you just always hear the one that you're not using.
I purposely try and use the other one when I hear the other one come just for enjoyment. Okay, so
So-
Casey, obviously we're trying to really hone in on the utilization of data to inform the work that's happening in schools. And
Yeah.
for yourself, when did you see the value of the data/data? And have you always been a fan, or is this a new
passion.
passion, obsession, quirk? Maybe this is part of the schizophrenia. Yeah, the data element for you.
Right. So I will say, I think I don't know that really focusing on data over time has been a passion of mine. It really wasn't until I got into instructional leadership that it just became so evident. Like in my classroom, I think as a classroom teacher, I was focused on my classroom data and it was important to me and I used it to inform decisions and I assumed that other people were doing the same thing. Well, when you move into instructional leadership, you see that not everyone does things the way that you do things. And you see all of these little holes and gaps. And you also see that people have different perspectives of data in education. Like we have a wide range of understanding about what do we consider as pieces of data, and also how do we approach analyzing data. And then what do we do with this analysis? Like there's just such a wide range of perspectives on what we do with that information and what it is. And so I think as I moved into instructional leadership is when I really became passionate about it, only because I realized it's so imperative that we have a common understanding of data in education and how we're going to utilize that data. And so over the last several years of really working with teams of teachers and teams of administrators, I love having the conversations about data because you can tell who is scared by it, who is uncomfortable with it. And that really opens up and paints a picture about what their background has been with it. So listen, that's that psychology piece coming out of it, right? And so it is just fascinating. And I really love to start breaking down those walls and those barriers for people who are opposed to digging into the data because it feels so personal to them.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, especially the psychology. So in addition to my true crime obsession, I also have an obsession with all things psychology, and emotional intelligence and everything. And I think that there's a lot, I feel like in the past, the focus on data has been very like data driven, rule driven, process driven, and we neglected the emotional aspect of being a teacher and having that intuition and having those children who you see as people, not numbers. And so we dove headfirst into it, and now we need to back up a little bit and realize that we got to slow down.
Yeah. And to me, this is one of the reasons why we've intentionally moved to the terminology of data informed, rather than data driven, because when you're data informed, you're also taking into account your daily observations, your intuitions, your professional judgment, but it shouldn't be void of a look at the data and what is the evidence that we're seeing to help guide our decisions.
Well, and it's only about being able to flag students so that we get that understanding about, this is one thing that might be happening, but what else do we know? So just being that head start. Casey, you were talking about having served in so many roles in education prior to jumping into your coaching and consulting. What from those experiences highlights the crucial need for clarity, especially when it comes to something as complex as school data?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to refer back to kind of what I hinted at, all of these different ideas that people have about data in education specifically. But from, I said earlier, I have all of these different perspectives. I think it's easy for us as leaders to lose perspective when you step out of like classroom teaching and things like that. But I also remember I said, when I came out of the classroom, I thought people did the same things the same way that I did. Like everyone's as passionate as I am. Everyone has the same philosophical understanding and pedagogy, etc. And you start to realize, that that's not the case. But too often we make the assumption, even as leaders, we make the assumption that people come into our school or onto our teams having this understanding of data and having this understanding of how to analyze it, how to take all of that information and let it inform your teaching. And so when I work with schools, especially when we're focused on looking at data, we talk about starting the year, not diving in, right, Jess? Like not diving into just analyzing the data and we're going to put it up on the walls and it's going to have all of these colors to it, which is great and grand. But if you haven't brought clarity to the why, the what, and the how, it's going to be almost impossible for people to actually make progress using that data. And so that's one of the pieces that I think is so important when it comes to clarity is we've got to get a really foundational understanding of our common understanding around and definitions around data and all things data before we actually start using it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
To me, this is one of the
true.
Yeah, and I'm also, when I'm working with schools, Casey, when a school will say, "Oh, what data should we be looking at?" Or even I'll hear from schools of, "We don't really have great academic data sets. What screeners should we use?" And we go, whoa, these are the wrong questions to ask right now. Let's back up. What are the priorities you're trying to attend to? And if you're not clear on that, then we have to back up further and say, okay, let's start taking a look at our organization, even then starting to look at a grand scale at our data, because if you're not clear on your priorities, you're going to get swamped with
and then
information.
We're using data for the sake of using data.
Yeah.
So then maybe it's not the kind of data we need to be using, it's fascinating how, and I think that comes from that push for being data driven, data, but there has to be a purpose for it and there has to be intentionality behind it.
Yeah. Whenever a school comes to me and asks me, what should we be collecting? I'm like, do you have like a strategic plan or improvement plan or something? Like everything should be focused on that, because if it is not, it is going to feel so disjointed and you're losing all of your people along the way because it's not purposeful. So we've talked about how your work centers so much on clarity, on creating that clarity for leaders and organizations. And you kind of hinted on this. I just wonder if there's anything else you want to add. Why is clarity such a non-negotiable, as you put it, specifically when we're talking about developing a thriving data culture?
If we don't prioritize clarity, then we are prioritizing the assumptions that we make and the narratives that we have built. And if we prioritize assumptions and preconceived narratives, then we are guaranteed to be disjointed. I like the way that you said that, Jess. And I think too, there's so much more to clarity than just the communication piece of it. Clarity has to have action put behind it. And so while we do want to create clarity and thinking about like our language and thinking about the communication of from leaders and between the adults on the campus, we also have to think about the trajectory of how we're going to implement the strategic plan and where data plays into that. And so not just the here and now of communicating that clear plan, but what does it look like in action over time? So, and I think too, we've talked already about this several times, but we dive into data analyzation, and that depletes our ability to have the capacity to actually thrive in a data-driven culture that we've already built, if that makes sense. So if we can map out the steps for utilizing data in a really intentional way, then we can transition from being data-driven to being data-informed. Do you guys like how I'm transitioning between data and data over and over again?
Yeah, I did notice that.
Okay.
I need
Inclusive.
Yeah, I need to know if it's purposeful or if you're just catching yourself now and again.
I don't know.
Okay, so Casey, I'm a principal and I've come to you and said, I need some help because my leadership team has analyzed the data within our school. We've determined what we're seeing as some key areas of focus. And I came and shared with my staff what those key areas of focus are. And they're still not clear. And I don't know what the problem is because I've said it at least 4 different times in staff meetings during the course of the year. I can see you smiling and nodding. How do you
a louder
respond?
voice at the 4th time?
Yeah. The 4th time I made it in bold letters on the slides that I presented
Large
to the
font.
staff. Yeah.
Yeah.
How
Then
would you respond? And then how would you go about helping to support someone who is feeling like we're looking at the data, feeling like I don't know how I can make it any more clear for my staff when you talk about clarity, but I think there's probably a missing element. Fill us in.
yeah.
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
Looking for practical strategies to use data effectively? Imagine classrooms where learning is personalized, student success is driven by insights, and school culture thrives on informed decisions. Join us for Data in Education, a virtual summit on June 10th and 11th. Discover new strategies from fellow educators and experts on data visualization, data culture, and data literacy. Learn how to create actionable dashboards, foster a positive data-informed culture, and use data to track and celebrate student growth. We are also super excited that Kurtis will be the keynote speaker for this event. This virtual summit is for educators, school leaders, and anyone else who wants to increase their impact on student success. Don't miss this opportunity to learn and collaborate with educators from all over. Register now at bit.ly/Data Summit 2025.
And now back to our conversation.
Then I would say, yes, there is clarity in your communication, but you're not bringing action to that clarity. So, and that's one thing that I focus on with instructional leaders is to take them through the clarity cycle framework. So it's like, yeah, we're going to start with your area of focus. And most people have some kind of area of focus. Even if they haven't communicated that with their staff, they know what it is they need to focus on. And typically that's going to come from what the data says, right? And then we take it a step further, like, okay, we got to get beyond that. We now have to develop some goals by analyzing this area of focus and really intentionally analyzing lots of components of data. And in the book that I've written, I've talked about utilizing both qualitative and quantitative data. And so we analyze that. That helps us determine goals, but then we take it another step further and we say, now that we know this area of focus and these goals, we've got to gain insight from our people so that there's ownership
There we go.
in our area of focus and our goals. And when we're gaining insight from these people, that's going to help us decide what are the strengths that we leverage. Do we need to adjust our goals? And what are the areas of need that are going to be important that we address as we start to script critical moves? And that's where that next step comes in. Now that we've gained insight, we're going to script critical moves so we can cast vision intentionally across the school year or maybe across multiple years. And here are the things that we're going to leverage because they are strengths. And here are the things that we're going to put in place over time so that our people can make progress toward these goals. And we don't feel like we're just saying the same thing over and over again, louder and louder, and frustrated that people aren't making progress or not getting on board. And then there's one more thing that I absolutely have to add to this, and that is providing feedback regularly and celebrating systematically. I think too often we miss that piece, but here's the thing. We can't provide feedback that's intentional and we can't celebrate systematically if we haven't scripted critical moves that are going to support your area of focus and your goals. So those are all of the little pieces that put action to clarity.
Well, and I think your key phrase there is the continual use of we. That if it's, as a leader, I've gone into the room and analyzed the data. Oh, that's great that you have clarity, but how do we create collective clarity through exactly what you're talking about, gaining everyone's insights?
Well, and you mentioned the ownership that happens through that process, right? That now everyone is involved and everyone has input because they've had that chance to be able to look at the data and be part of determining those next steps.
Yes, absolutely.
So then, how do you go about, Casey, bringing that clarity to the data culture? I think I flipped it again. To that data culture for that can empower then our teachers and leaders and just lead to, better questions, better conversations, and then ultimately better decisions for students.
It takes time. It takes patience. It takes time. And it takes, I would say, building habits of clarity-driven leaders. So when I talked about those steps that you might take as a leader, really you're looking at it as not steps that you're going to go through as a one and done, but it's habits that you are building. So when I talk about gaining insight, yes, it is a step. It is an action you need to take, but it's a habit you need to develop where you're continuously gaining insight from your people so that they can take ownership. And, I want to mention providing feedback and celebrating systematically again. That is a piece that is non-negotiable. And you can ask your people about ways they prefer to have feedback provided to them. What's going to be, and when we talk about feedback, I think a lot of the time when leaders hear that, they start to think about, if I'm providing feedback, I'm going to do the sandwich method, like Oreo, like something positive, something negative, something positive. But we can go beyond that surface level type of feedback, and people want you to go beyond that because they want to be held accountable truly. Like go into any school, you're going to hear people say, I want to be told what to do. I want to be told when I'm not doing it, and I want it to be addressed. That's accountability. That's what they're saying is, yes, hold me accountable. But we get really uncomfortable with how to hold people accountable. And I'm telling you, if you can learn the art of creating clarity, then accountability is just going to come with that. If you can gain these habits as a leader, then accountability is going to happen within that framework. Now, I want to talk about something really, really practical, and maybe this addresses the question, and maybe it doesn't. But when I'm working with teams who are about to analyze data, one of the things that I always do, always, is set norms. And I know, Kurtis, you and Lorna talk a lot about setting norms too in the work that you do. But we have a tendency when teachers hear the term norms, because they come with all of these different perspectives of what norms are, depending on where they've come from and their past experiences, they think about it as rules or expectations, right? And what we want to do is take time to intentionally understand, like, if this is what we're doing right now as a staff, like we want to analyze data and we want to use it to inform our decisions in the classroom and as a whole campus, then what are we going to commit to ensure that we're reaching this goal that we have, or that we're productive when we leave this time together, really having accomplished what we came in here to accomplish? Your norms have to be super intentional, and they really are commitments that you want people to make. And then the other thing that I do almost all the time is I implement something called phrases to avoid, mindsets to employ. So as a staff, before we dig into the data, because it can be so personal, and also we can make so many justifications as teachers because it is personal, what I like to do is have them think about phrases they want to avoid, like phrases that often come to mind where we start to justify things in the data, or we start to blame external factors. What are those phrases we want to avoid? And instead, what are mindsets we want to employ as we approach data that sometimes can feel a little bit uncomfortable or hard to analyze? Here's an example. So often, and here in the state of Texas, people take the STAR assessment, right? It's like the end of year assessment.
Right.
And so if you're analyzing that data, it can be easy to say, or really with any big like state assessment, it can be easy to say, well, it was the questions. The questions were too hard. So that's a phrase we want to try to avoid because there's nothing we can do about that. So what we want to employ instead is, okay, there are going to be complex questions on any state assessment. We know that to be true. So that's just a mindset, just a quick mindset shift that we want to make before we start analyzing data. So those are some practical things that you might do with your teams.
Well, and Jess, I'd love
so much.
Yeah, I'd love for you to share too. One of the commitments I know that you've often started off analyzing data right off the bat with teams.
Yeah. So typically, when we go into these conversations, you're right. We have those mindsets. We have those phrases that we typically are they're lingering in there during that whole conversation, right? Even if you're not able to say them, you're waiting until you guys get to the teacher's room or out in the hallway to be like, oh my God, like they forgot about all of this stuff. So a lot of times when schools are going into those conversations, I tell them that they're dealing with that heavy data that they feel like their teachers are feeling defensive about. To start with the question, like, what do we not see in this data? What is this data not showing us? And I've even done it before where I've gone up to the board with a marker and I just let them talk. I didn't say a word and I just wrote down everything they said. And I said, we know that we're leaving out all of this. It's like, we understand it. We recognize it. Now let's focus on what value we can pull from this data. We have to understand that to begin with. And it helps them get all of that out of their system and feel heard, because it's important and legitimate concerns. Sometimes the concerns are this data doesn't show us what we need to see. And I mean, with the state assessment, you can't do a whole lot about that, but maybe you say, well, if it's not showing us what we need to see, what can we pull that might show us what we need to see? Is there something different that we should be looking at? Is there something that in addition to this that we should be looking at? Because our ultimate goal is to make sure that we are meeting every student's needs, and our intuition alone is not going to cover that goal. So what can we do to back that up and help us better inform our decisions that we're making for our students?
Okay, that's so important. And it's just making me think sometimes we use the wrong data to inform our decisions.
Yeah.
And so I think that's so important too, before you start analyzing data to decide, like, is this going to give us the information that is necessary, and how are we letting it inform our decisions?
I love that idea of facing things right from the beginning, that we're going to just name everything. And we do that kind of work as well within what we do, really thinking about that locus of control and naming what's getting in the way, and how do we move away from things that we can't we can't do anything about, but let's focus on the things that we do have within our control. Yep.
Yeah, I think so often, we try to ignore those and just like avoid them at all costs, but being able to address them in the way that Casey said, and the way that I said, like I said, it allows you to have that open conversation and move forward from there.
So, Jess, with that, I mean, obviously you're pointing towards needing high levels of trust and vulnerability in time. And I would argue it's not, we need to develop this first and then look at the data. I think it's no, we develop it while looking at the data. Casey, what would be some suggestions that you would give to organizations when trying to get really clear on where we're going as an organization? What are some ways that we can build that trust and vulnerability that becomes so critical when we are looking at our data?
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
I wish we had more data, said no teacher ever. Our contemporary schools have an abundance of data we can be accessing to inform decision-making from the classroom level to the school level and beyond. Data as a focal point is no longer elusive. The challenge lies in structuring and presenting it in a way that facilitates easy interpretation and actionable insights. How we organize the data matters. My name is Kurtis Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. In this free on-demand webinar, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 mistakes leaders make when organizing data for their teams. Access this webinar, and in addition to how to address these 5 mistakes, numerous free resources will be shared with you that you can begin using immediately. I can't wait to have you join me to ensure you aren't committing one or several of these mistakes within your own organization.
And now back to our conversation.
Ooh, that's a loaded question, Kurtis. Do we have a few more hours?
Well, I do want to pause to mention that you will have 50 minutes in the Data and Education Virtual Summit, where you'll be talking about 3 things every data leader should know to navigate difficult conversations with confidence. And I feel like that feeds right into this. So if you need a direction to go, feel free to talk about that.
Okay. Well, I want to say first and foremost, as an instructional leadership team, as an instructional leader, let's just assume you are the principal of the campus. And yes, it is up to you to know the direction that your campus is headed, but that work should not necessarily be done by you alone. So you shouldn't feel alone in that. You need to pull in your instructional leadership team, whoever those people might be, to start that work with you. And my suggestion is to start early. Don't wait until beginning of the school year. Don't wait until July. Start early with your team and start identifying what, in our minds, like if you really want to become a data-informed campus where there is a positive culture around data, then that obviously is your area of focus. And you want to start in the summer really getting clear about what that looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like. And if those things are true, like if it's true that we want people to feel comfortable having conversations that really seem uncomfortable or difficult, or we want people to celebrate data, we want people to celebrate what they're doing that's contributing to the success of our students. Like if you want all of those things to be true and you want your data to be intentional, purposeful, and inform instruction and other decisions, then you've got to paint a picture for yourself of what that looks like. And then you have to communicate that picture to your people. And it is such a process, but it's such an important process to take on, probably more important in the beginning than the act of analyzing data itself. Because if you don't have that, you're kind of setting yourself up for what's always happened with data. And if on your campus, it's not been intentional, purposeful, and people walk away kind of not having a sense of direction or dreading those meetings, then we're just going to repeat those patterns. So really spend time analyzing what it is you want that data culture to look like. And then you can reach out to me and we can map out a process for making that happen across the school year so you don't lose momentum, so you can sustain progress. And then, yes, absolutely, come to the summit, come to my session, because we're actually going to specifically talk about those challenging conversations that have to happen when you're analyzing data. It's not like they're not going to happen, because they are going to happen.
Yeah.
Let's get ahead of them and prepare for them.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and I think it's so true. You have to be intentional. Just making up words now. Forget the mispronunciation. We're just go with new words. Intentional about how to create that culture. And so often we focus on, the data literacy and the data visualization and creating all of those procedures without having that intentionality behind creating that culture. So,
Right.
100% agree.
Yeah. And you can't have that intentionality if you haven't created your own vision and just take a step back and just imagine what that's going to look like. And if you're not the person that is able to do that visionary futuristic thinking, pull in somebody from your team and say, I know where to start. I just can't see big picture. Let the big picture people share what the big picture is in their minds and allow them to create that for you.
Absolutely.
That's so great. Well, Casey, how can our listeners get in touch with you when they hear the messages that you have to share?
Other than attending your session on June 10th.
That's right. Come to my session June 10th. I don't remember what time, but come to my session. It's going to be so fun.
It's the first session of the day, different time depending on time zone, but first group of sessions of the day.
Love it. Okay. So you guys can find me on LinkedIn primarily, and my handle is Catch Up with Casey. And just FYI, it's Catch Up with Casey on any social media platform. So, and then the other place that you can get continuous content, very much like what we've talked about today, is the Catching Up with Casey show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts.
We will make sure that that's in the show notes. And we also really encourage people, if you haven't yet, check out The Craft of Clarity. It's a book that was released this year by Casey. Search out on Amazon for it. Great read. That will, again, help the work that you're doing to create that clarity as leaders.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah, Casey, it's been absolutely wonderful getting to touch base with you.
Thanks so much, Casey.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
All right. We've had the chance to interact with Casey on our podcast previously. And Jess, I know you have as well. But this is the first time we've really had her dig in specifically to the data conversation here. I would love to hear from the two of you. What stood out as some key insights from Casey?
So I think, first of all, Casey talked a little bit about that prioritizing assumptions and what that does to your culture, and that it really creates that disjointed culture when we prioritize our assumptions, but rather moving to that clarity. So where are we going, and how are we really clear with our team to ensure that we know what direction we're heading?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. And I also, I can't get over the phrases to avoid, mindsets to employ. Just the sound of it just sounds pretty to my ears, but also the meaning and like we talked about in the podcast, that idea of addressing those pain points head on and making sure that we give people a chance to talk through some of that and figure out how to best move on from those barriers.
Well, and what you're trying to do with that too is co-create clarity. And she talked about creating ownership amongst the team, that it's not the leaders that are creating clarity for everyone else. It's got to be done together. And that is messy. So we have to be willing to confront some tough conversations, but put the work in prior to prep ourselves for those hard conversations, which is exactly what both of you are pointing to.
Well, and the other part of that too is in that examination of data, then it can become a step-by-step. This is what you do first. This is what you do next. But in doing that, we are actually creating that culture of collaboration and thinking through what habits are we teaching. And Casey talks lots about creating those habits that create positive culture as well, but really thinking less about the step-by-step data piece, more about what we're trying to do through that work.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Jess, for anyone that's listening that want to be able to hear more from Casey and actually see some real specifics on how she goes about this, how can they catch her at the Data and Education Summit?
Yeah, so she's going to be presenting, like I said, that first slot on June 10th. And we'll put the link in the show notes. You can go there, go ahead and grab a ticket. Just a heads up, if you do grab one of those live and replay tickets, you also get a free copy of Kurtis and Lorna's book, Collaborative Response. So a big benefit there. Make sure you grab your ticket. We're less than a month away.
Absolutely. And if anyone's listening to this episode and it's already passed, that's great. Just search out Data and Education Summit because, Jess, I know this is something that you look at doing a couple times a year, correct?
Yes. Yeah. At least twice a year.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. With that, this has been a great episode for our bonus series of 7 speakers in 7 days. And we look forward to the next conversation. Jess, we'll see you again soon.
See you soon.
Yep. See ya.
Jigsaw Learning, founded by Kurtis and Lorna Hewson, is a team of educators who work with schools, districts, and educational leaders to establish collaborative response to ensure success for all students. Because every child deserves a team.